Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome to my podcast for women in leadership and business. My name is Sreshtha Tewari, for those of you who don't know me. I'm an emotional intelligence coach and an emotional healer. I am purposefully passionate about helping women, career women, successful women in particular, get unstuck in their career if they want to move further ahead or even in their personal life and build a bridge to their dreams. Today, I have a sensitive but very important topic on suicide prevention. Last Saturday was Suicide Awareness Day, and we are in the month of suicide awareness. I got the idea to do the podcast after looking at posts on LinkedIn. Just last week in Australia, there was an article of a young woman who was 33 years old, EY in Australia. And it is thought that she passed due to self-harm. It's not confirmed, but that is the belief. And when I thought back on the series that I have done, the Domestic Abuse Awareness series, and even the Women Who Inspire series, I have had more than one of my friends and persons tell me that they have indeed had suicidal thoughts in their life. So that led me to look up one of my good friends, Denise Jittan-Johnson, who's a clinical psychologist, because as a coach, suicide is not something I would deal with. I would always refer my clients, if I find that they have these thoughts, to a psychologist. Most of you who followed my domestic abuse awareness series would know Denise from that series. She is involved with a lot of work in respect of trauma. She has been involved in several key initiatives in the Caribbean in respect of trauma and has had very much a lot of success in this area. And most of you gave me such wonderful feedback on the gentle and delicate way she handles these topics. I was really excited to have her back. So, welcome back again, Denise, to my podcast, this time a live podcast, which is different from before. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I am doing well, and thank you again for this initiative that you're putting forward. Yeah.
Yes, you're most welcome. So, if you are here and you would just like to say hi, please feel free to say hi in the chat. I may not see your name. That's okay. It's just nice to know we have company. So, when I looked up the statistics on suicide, and Denise will talk more about it, according to the CDC in 2020, suicide was among the top leading causes of death in persons aged 10 to 64. Hi, I'm not seeing your name, right? Who's telling me hi? But thanks for saying hi. The more frightening statistic is that it was the second leading cause of death in ages to 14 and 25 to 34. And when I engaged Denise, I was asking her from with the lens of women, because my podcasts are really geared towards women, even though if guys are looking on, I'm very happy to have you. And she was explaining the the distinctions behind the statistic. So Denise, I'll ask you to explain the statistics. I know you have particularly for Trinidad and in relation to the men and the women who go through with this self-harm and who think of it.
Yeah, so locally, we've really seen a uptick in people who are suffering and people who are struggling through different stage of life issues and different socioeconomic issues. A lot of the reason is because of the pandemic. The pandemic has really exacerbated some situations that could have probably been managed and dealt with, but being on lockdown, having limited access to financial security based on all of the happenings over the past 2 years, major health concerns, and everything being confined into a very small space, into the home. We have school, well, at some points we had school, work, recreation, everything was happening in a very confined space. And we had limited access and means to be able to socialize and free up in a way that would really help people to manage their stresses, right? So the pandemic, and in this post-pandemic era, we're seeing a lot of mental health issues. Locally, there are a lot of statistics talking about suicidality in men versus women. And I'm so glad that you were talking about the numbers just now, Shrey, because what if we just look at the numbers alone, statistics are showing that men have a higher completion rate when it's talking about suicidality. But if we look at the numbers alone, it's masking something that is going on with women. And it's not to say that women are not suffering and women do not have suicidal thoughts and ideation. But when we look at people's means and access to things of successful completion, men's chosen mechanism of attempting is far more lethal than some of the ways that women will try. So if we're looking at the numbers, it doesn't mean that women aren't as affected by suicidal thoughts and suicidal behaviors, but they're just less likely as compared to our male counterparts of successful completion. So it's really important to note that everyone is equally, uh, everybody has an equal chance of having suicidal thoughts and acting on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is such a scary thing because I don't I mean, I know a lot of statistics on domestic abuse awareness, and to me, if it is 1 in 3 for women and men, that can also imply the ratio for just the thoughts, even though it is not statistical, because a lot of persons who are in situations where they feel they have no hope and they feel caged mentally and emotionally may have some thought in respect of the value of their life that they are living. And I really, I fathom, I guess, that if you were to interview persons and ask, have you ever had a suicidal thought in your life? The statistics would be very alarming. So I want to ask you, Denise, what are some of the risk factors for these thoughts even forming? What are some of the environments in which these thoughts form in respect of self harm?
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm so glad that you kind of mentioned this idea of measuring suicidal thoughts. It's a really hard thing to study, right? Because not everybody is even willing to have conversations about it. And that's why these spaces and these conversations, raising awareness, is so important. Because if we look solely at the risk factors for suicidal thoughts, we'd see that they're very general risk factors. So one of the big risk factors is prolonged exposure to extreme stress. And all of us at various points in our lives have been stressed out. And as I was saying, the pandemic has really taken its toll on levels of stress. So, one of the big markers of risk factors is exposure to prolonged stress. And what we know as psychologists and what new research is coming out with is prolonged exposure to stress is a trauma. So the way that your body, your mind, your brain experiences it is as a trauma. So if you are in a relationship that's highly stressful, work environments that are highly stressful, you don't have available means of healthy coping, you don't have connection with close friends and family and people who can be of support, your risk goes up. Yeah. A lot of times,
Mhm.
um, a lot of times people think that suicidality is only something that, diagnosed depressed people might have, or people with different psychiatric and psychological disorders might suffer with. But the reality is that exposure to prolonged stress is a giant risk factor. When we have persons who are experiencing intense feelings of obviously sadness, but also guilt, shame, and being overwhelmed, when people are socially isolated and withdrawn, those are all factors that go into suicidal thoughts as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you talk about prolonged exposure to stress, especially for persons, career women in the working world. And actually, that the death I spoke about in the beginning, they were talking about how it's audit season in Australia, and those persons are required to work up to 60 hours a week. And in the article, they spoke about how their managers would send them emails with expectations that they must work on a Saturday and they are not expected to leave the office. I believe it is before 10:30 in the night. I may have the time wrong, but it's a long time. And we don't, we grow up believing in order to get by in life, you really have to push yourself and sort of sell yourself to the job in order to get the money in order to live. Because when we are small, we are guided to think that once you have money, you will be happy. But now we know that life is an integration and it's not only having physical needs met, but it's also the mental and emotional aspects. And I like that you talk about that. It can be stress with related to work or even in a domestic situation. There, it can be any pocket of your life that is not going the way you wanted to, or is inflicting the sadness or thoughts or anxiety or the low frequency emotions that can lead you to have those thoughts. And we all know every human goes through some difficult situation in their life. It's just a question of how prolonged is the situation such that these thoughts may arise in you. And I also wanted to ask you if let's some excuse me, someone discloses to you that they are having, actually, let me start first. If someone, let's just say currently watching, is having some of these thoughts, as a psychologist, what would you recommend they do? Oh, I'm not hearing.
Sorry, I just noticed I muted myself because I'm very close to the oval right now. And as we know, cricket is going on. So we're having a lot of noise
No
on the other.
problem.
So that's why I'm muting myself if I'm not speaking.
Okay.
But if it is that we're thinking of increased risk factors and you are dealing with thoughts of self harm, one of the things, well, a few things actually increases your risk of completion. So whether or not you have access to means of coping, healthy coping, connection with friends, family, that is extremely important because one of the biggest preventative factors is that space of connection. If it is that you have access to whatever lethal means that you're thinking about, if you're under the influence of drugs, alcohol, anything like that, if you've had past attempts at suicide, all of those things indicate that your risk factor of actually acting on these thoughts is a lot higher. So, if it is that you're currently struggling with suicidal thoughts or suicidal behaviors, and you're actively thinking about completing, one of the best things that you can do is go to emergency services. So, any emergency service, hospitals, health centers, those spaces are equipped and able to be able to manage intake and immediate support if it is that you're currently thinking about acting on these thoughts. There are also some hotlines that are available. There are hotlines that work in the nighttime hours. They're bilingual hotlines because we know in our local population now we do have to consider persons who speak Spanish. And one of those hotlines that you can use is actually a toll free hotline. It's 866-7428, and they have trained listeners who would be able to help you help you process through whatever thoughts you're having, connect you with emergency services should it be needed. There are also Lifeline. You can also call emergency services such as ambulance, fire, police, if it is that you're currently actively suicidal. If it is that you have somebody, a loved one, who you have concern for, one of the first things that you can do is ask. If it is that you're noticing some of these suicidal risk factors, if they're withdrawing, if their behavior is markedly changed, if they're actually talking about death, if they're starting to give away prized possessions, if they're starting to make movements that indicate to you that they are suffering and they might complete, the best thing that you can do is ask. A lot of people tend to shy away from asking the question because there's this common myth of, okay, well, if I talk about it, maybe I would increase the person's likelihood of doing it. Maybe I might put the idea in their head or things like that. But it's actually the opposite is true. Asking if somebody that you have concern for might be thinking about it has the opposite effect. Acknowledging those suicidal thoughts actually opens that channel of communication. It opens that space of support and is another point and access to care that this person might not have had before. So you see this idea of just being there, being connected with them, listening, um, and just being a positive presence. You don't necessarily have to understand what they're going through. You don't have to have answers to any of the challenges that they might be voicing, but just simply being there and listening is something as well. Another big thing that you can do is keeping them safe. So if there are things around the home or around the person's immediate environment that might be risky. So, for example, if they're talking about taking pills, assess whether or not they have access to the pills. Do they have enough pills to possibly be successful in their completion? What type of medication do they have available? Taking those things away. Um, if it is that they're talking about using weapons or knives or things like that, reducing access and means to be able to actually complete with their thoughts is really important in terms of keeping persons safe, and then also pointing them in the direction of professional support as well. So, yes, we have those emergency services that I would have spoken about before, but also professional services like the services of the psychologist, psychiatrist, persons who are trained to be able to handle these major mental health issues and help them and support them in managing through these suicidal thoughts and hopefully get peace of
Okay,
mind.
and I want to ask you a question in relation to the work environment as well. For leaders and persons with teams, are there any signs that or triggers that if a person were to start behaving a certain way in the office environment, in the work environment, or maybe they may have things that they may say or maybe just become reclusive, I'm not sure, but are there any signs or triggers that a people manager can look for or may lead them to probably have that conversation you were talking about earlier and um, direct the person towards help in the work world?
Yeah. So that's a very, it's obviously one of the things that's really important as a people manager is knowing the baseline of the persons that you're working with. So having an idea of what this person's normal disposition is. Because if you know what their normal disposition is, you'd be able to see shifts and changes in that individual. Yeah. So, simply saying if somebody's socially withdrawn might not catch the suicidal behavior on its own, right? Because some people are just naturally more socially withdrawn, right?
Yeah.
But it's about knowing what the each person's baseline is. In your workplace, I'm sure you know those persons who might be more bubbly, more outgoing, more chatty. If that person does become a little bit more reserved, a little bit more sullen, then yeah, that might be a red flag to look out for. If you're seeing shifts in productivity, that's another big marker. And it could be shifts in either direction. A lot of times people think about the non-productive side of it, which could be the truth for some people, is that you have reduced will and you have reduced output and you have reduced what's the word I'm looking for? Reduced motivation to work, right?
Yeah.
But in some cases, if people are actively thinking about completing, it might mean that they're finishing multiple projects at once. They're
Right.
tying up loose ends. They're trying to like prepare for them not being there in the future. So if we see shifts in levels of productivity, that's also a sign that something might be going on. Looking for shifts in energy level, changes in socialization patterns, eating patterns, all of those things are subtle markers. But the important factor is really knowing um, what each individual's baseline is.
Okay, okay, thank you. And it's such an interesting conversation, and I know we could go on and on, but I'll just ask you one last question. If someone were to disclose to you that they are having suicidal thoughts, what should that person do?
Mhm. So, really and truly, it's those steps that I was talking about just now. Um, Asking, being there as a point of support, listening, connecting them with resources, and then after you do all of that, following up with them to see how they're doing and how they're coping. If you are experiencing a friend or loved one yourself who's actively suicidal, reaching out to those hotlines, reaching out to Lifeline. Those numbers again are 866-7428, and then Lifeline's number is 800-5588, as well as emergency services if it's an active suicidal situation that we're dealing with.
Okay, okay, thank you so much, Denise. It was such a wealth of information as usual. And before we close, do you have any final thoughts or anything you would like to share before we close on this topic that I may not have covered?
Just the importance of having conversations like this. I think this is a topic that a lot of people are afraid to even broach. And the more that we talk about suicide, the more that we talk about persons who are struggling, the less people are likely to feel isolated and alone with these feelings. Because just having these open spaces of conversation, increasing awareness is really vital. And I want to encourage persons to not suffer alone. If you do need support, reach out for help. There's no shame in seeking professional support. I know that there's a lot of stigma around seeking professional support. But if you're struggling, you don't have to wait until that extreme. You can seek professional help and support at any space. If you're struggling with something emotionally, mentally, seek help, seek support.
Yes, thank you so much. And it really, we really have to destigmatize seeking support. I am very open about the fact that I saw a psychologist maybe for about 6 months when I was getting divorced. It was one of the best things and actually part of what led me to what I'm doing today. And for those of you who are going through or maybe have these thoughts, I just want to remind you that you are here for a reason. You are a unique human being. There is no one else like you. And whatever you are going through, I have found it's always part of your journey so that when you learn, we call it your hero's journey in coaching. So when you learn and you come out of that fire as a phoenix, it will become your story to now help other person. So if you are in this situation, please reach out. I have the hotline below. And if you're interested in contacting Denise, her website is djjpsych.com. I believe I do have it in my description box. And if you can't reach her or if it is not clear, please feel free to reach out to me and I will get you onto her. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. And I will see you all again next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.